Hi, I'm Aaron. I own Badass Cars. So you're interested in an engine either built by us or somebody else. Well, before you get a price or before you consider what kind of engine to get, consider this. There's a whole bunch of factors involved that dictate what an engine's going to be, what it's going to be used for, how much the price is going to be, what the components might be in it. The variables are endless. As you can see, we build some pretty badass stuff. You can look in our galleries and see the cars we build. You can look at our engine galleries and see all the engines we build. We build them for stock cars, we build them for vintage vehicles, we build them for drag cars, pro street cars, road racers. We've got class champions, we've got track record setters and record holders, we've got all kinds of show winners. We've got engines and cars that we've built that have won all kinds of events, all kinds of shows in all 50 states and in 11 countries around the world. So we do build some pretty badass stuff. The question I always get is, hey Aaron, how much to build a given motor? Let's take a 408 Ford, a small block Ford. This is a 408 cubic inch small block. It's a stroker. So a lot of guys will say, hey Aaron, I want 500 horsepower. How much will it cost? First and foremost, you don't buy horsepower, you buy quality and strength. What I mean by that, I can take a basic engine in stock form, stock crankshaft, stock connecting rods, a stock block, stock bearings, cast pistons, cast iron rings, a flat tappet cam, even the cast iron heads, and port them out, do a really nice port job on them, just bump the compression up a little bit and put a big cam in it and get quite a bit of horsepower out of it. The question is, how long is that engine going to last? So you have to ask yourself, if I want a 500 horsepower motor, or a 400 or 300 or 800 or 1,000, you always have to consider this. How long is it going to last and how well is it built? An engine has to be built strong enough to withstand its own power. So a lot of guys will say, well, my buddy, he says he can build me a 500 horsepower motor for 3,500 bucks. Hey, so can I. I can build a complete stock trim motor and it's going to last about 3, 2, 1 seconds, kaboom. And the reason it's going to explode isn't because it's built wrong or anything, or the machine works bad, the assembly's bad or anything like that. The reason it's going to let go is because the components in it simply aren't strong enough to withstand the kind of power the engine's making. This is how nitrous oxide got a bad rap. Everybody would put nitrous oxide on a car and they go, wow, 75 horsepower feels good. Let's put 100 horsepower to it. Wow, that feels great. Put a 150 shot. And they do it on a stock engine, and the engine that they have usually has 100,000 miles on it or 150,000 miles, and the thing lets go. And then they blame the nitrous. It wasn't the nitrous. That old crappy engine couldn't withstand an extra 150 horsepower, 200 horsepower on top of what it was making in the first place. It just wasn't going to hold together. It's the same thing with engines. So building an engine, whether it's a small block Ford like this or a 540 cubic inch big block Chevy like this, you have to consider not how much horsepower it's going to make, but what are the components that are in it? What are you getting for your money? Now, you can't be swayed by magazine ads. I can't stand magazine ads that boast about 560 horsepower small block for, $89.95. There's an old saying, dynos don't lie. Yeah, they do. Dynos lie really bad. And it's not necessarily the dyno itself that lies, it's the guy doing the input. I can dyno an engine. I can take this engine right here. This motor makes about 510 horsepower. It's a 408 cubic inch small block Ford. 510 horsepower may sound quite a lot to some of you, and it may sound like not a lot to some of you. The difference is this engine is built to withstand. This engine is going to last 10 years. It's just going to keep going and going and going, which is the reputation I got for building motors like that. They don't come apart. The reason is I overbuild everything. But I can take this basically 510 horsepower motor and put it on a dyno and manipulate the dyno, and I can make this engine read 600 horsepower. It's not the dyno that's lying, it's the data input, the air temperature, the barometric pressure, just how much water is going to the water break on the dyno. There's a lot of stuff like that that's involved, and magazine ad engines tend to do that. Oh, we got all this horsepower. But then you look at the components they put in it, and they're cast pistons, like hypereutectic pistons. They got a steel crank, but it's not forged, it's a cast steel crank. They don't put good connecting rods, or even the gaskets or bearings aren't that good. Always remember this, you get what you pay for. So if you're looking at a cheap engine, it's cheap for a reason. So consider this. This is something that every one of you can totally relate to. Take tools. You all probably have some good tools, and you probably have some crappy tools. Good tools are expensive for a reason, because they're made of a better quality. I can take a couple of wrenches. You can look at these right here, a couple of wrenches. All right, they look pretty similar. The difference is this one right here is a cheap, crappy, Chinese-made chrome vanadium wrench that you can get at Walmart or any of the cheap stores like that. This is a Craftsman. Now, Craftsman wrench, fairly heavy, but good material. This wrench will last you a long time. That's why it's got a good warranty on it. We offer a good warranty on our motors. All right, here's the difference in these. As soon as I put a little torque to this, it broke the end right off. Why? Because it's a cheap wrench. They're both 7/16 in size. They're both the same. They'll fit the same nuts and bolts. They do the same job, just like an engine that makes 500 horsepower. If I build two side by side, well, this one makes 500 horsepower and this one makes 500 horsepower. But this one has a stock block, stock bolts in it, like the main bolts and things like that, stock rods, cast pistons, a big cam, maybe some porting or some aftermarket heads or something. That engine is not going to last as long with the kind of power it's making than one that's built like a Craftsman wrench that has a better crank, better rods, forged pistons, ARP bolts everywhere, much heavier duty bearings, hand-fitted rings, great machining. The machining we do on everything is second to none. I machine a block full on every time. I don't just do what's needed like a lot of shops do. Oh, we didn't deck it or we didn't square deck it. There's a lot to the machining process other than just boring and honing. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But looking at these wrenches, yeah, I can go to Walmart and buy a wrench like this for about 69 cents. I can go to Sears and I can buy a wrench like this, a good Craftsman wrench, for about $6.99. Or if you really want something, you can get a really nice, lightweight, very contoured aftermarket wrench like a Snap-on or Matco, any of the high-end wrenches. They're thinner, they're stronger, they reach into places better, and they last decades. I've had this since I was a kid, when I was about 13 years old. I still use some of the wrenches I bought, of my initial tools that I bought when I was 13 years old. I still have them in the shop. That's how long they last. If you put these type of components, or at least Craftsman components, in an engine, you're going to have a better motor. So the question never is, how much is a given amount of horsepower? You buy quality and strength, not horsepower. So going back to machining, every engine we do is fully on machined, and there's a lot more to machining than just boring and honing. There's a line honing, there's square decking, or what they call parallel decking. There's chasing threads. There's all kinds of things that are involved. Chamfering cylinders, chamfering the main caps and things like that, fitting the main caps. Just because you align hone it doesn't mean the main caps are tight, that they're located in place very well. I go through a block and do all of that. So there's a big difference between machining at a regular machine shop or machining of something like I do. And the results show. I didn't get my reputation for building cheap, crappy engines. I've been doing this for 30 some odd years. I've got 0 BBB complaints and 0 BAR complaints. You can look all that up. Am I the best guy out there? Do I know everything? Hell no. No one does. I don't care if you're a Formula One guy or a Top Fuel guy or an astronaut. You don't know everything about everything. We learn something new every day in here. And that's how I learned. The way I learned, starting out as a kid, growing up in a family that had some pretty cool cars, some race cars, road racers. My father was a Bonneville guy. My mom was a road racer. I learned because I grew up pretty poor. And what happened was, when I'm building engines, I would take something out and break it because I couldn't afford something really good. And I'd go, man, that thing broke. How the heck am I going to get this to not break next time? So I would build it up again to the point to where that part wouldn't break. Then, of course, I'd take it out to Fremont or on the street doing some street racing back in the 70s. And I'd break something else and go, oh, darn, that broke. Well, I can't afford to do this again, so I want to do it right. That's my motto. Do it right once and be done with it. Don't dick around putting cheap parts in there or doing it half-assed, because you're going to have a half-assed motor, it's not going to perform well, and you're going to have problems with it. Well, it costs 2 or 3 times more to go back the second time and do it, instead of just doing it right once. And what I mean by that is, if your engine grenades and you got a couple of good components in it, and something happens to it, you got to take it all apart to get to that, then replace the crappy parts you bought with good parts. So you spent twice as much money and you spent 2 or 3 times more time. It's better just to do it right once and be done with it. And that's what I help you do. I don't just sell cookie cutter engines. I don't have pre-made engines. Every engine has a specific job that it's going to do because it's going in a specific car. Not everybody drives the same. A guy that wants an engine like this is a completely different guy that wants an engine like this. A guy that's road racing is a completely different guy that's drag racing. A guy that's cruising on the street is a completely different guy that's going to run his car at 200 miles an hour in a Silver State Classic race. Whole different ball games of engines. So you can't just look at that engine makes 500 horsepower. Yeah, maybe it does at 8,000 RPM. Do you want to drive around on the street at 8,000 RPM all day? No, you can't do that. Even if you weren't going fast, you just left it in first gear, you're going to get a ticket. You can't have acceleration like that, noise like that, and not get busted. Wouldn't it be nice to have 500 horsepower at 3,000 RPM? That's brute torque. And that's a problem a lot of people look at. They don't look at torque. All they look at is horsepower. Horsepower doesn't even come into play till 4,400 RPM. When the power curve on a dyno comes up and you're watching horsepower and torque, they both cross at about 4,400 RPM, right in that range. Okay, so what moves the vehicle below 4,400 RPM? Torque, raw torque. Torque pulls weight. So if you don't have good gears, you don't have a high stall converter, your chassis is not set up really, really well or anything like that, you're going to need a torquey engine to pull that car, especially if it's a heavy vehicle. A lot of guys look at small engines. They're like, man, I want a 327 Chevy. That was the best engine. Yeah, it was a good engine, and it was a hot little motor simply because they only offered a 327 in like Corvettes and things like that. Yeah, they came in Impalas and stuff like that too. They only offered performance engines in the 327 because they didn't have the 350 until 1968. And even when they did that, they put the 350 in heavier cars. Why? Because it makes more torque. It pulls the heavier car better. And then in 1970 and a half, 71, right in that range, you had the LT1 350, the 370 horse 350. It had a lot more torque than the little 327 had because it's got more crankshaft. Cranks make leverage. That's why we go with strokers, like a 540 or a 408. This is a 351. It fits in all Mustangs, 65, 66, 67. Anywhere a 289 or a 302 will fit, a 408 will fit. It's based on a 351 Windsor. So if you're going to buy aftermarket crank, aftermarket rods, forged pistons, and you're going to do all this stuff to an engine, why do that to a 289 or 302? Or some guys will go, I'm going to build a 331 or a 347 stroker. You're still less the size than a 351 Windsor. And this is a taller deck height. It's got a much stronger crankshaft. It's a much stronger block. It's got much stronger rods, longer rods. It's a much better internal geometry engine, and it'll just stomp all over any 289, 302, 331, or 347. So if you're going to spend upwards of $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 or so on an engine, why mess around with a little 289 or 302 or a little stroker? Go right to a 351. And if you're going to buy all that aftermarket stuff, it's only a couple of dollars more to go to the 408 or a 427 or something. This is why we build big motors like this in small packages, because they make raw, brutal torque. Torque is what moves the vehicle. Most races, most street racing, is between 0 and 50 or 0 and 60 miles an hour. When you're getting on a freeway, you're accelerating from a slow speed up to about 60 or 70 miles an hour. That's torque. What you don't want to do is end up with an engine that's like a chainsaw. Chainsaws wind up to about 19,000 RPM. You got that thing at full throttle and you hit the tree and go. But a chainsaw makes no torque, just like a two-stroke motorcycle makes no torque. A two-stroke, when it's on the pipe, does really good. When it's on the power band, it's fantastic. But if you're not on that power band, it can't get out of its own way. You don't want a street motor like that. What's going to happen is it's only going to make power from 4,500 or 5,000 RPM to about 8,000. So you don't want to put high horsepower motors in small packages, in small cubic inch packages. You want to add cubic inches, especially by stroke, by the crankshaft. This is what you pay for in a motor. Quality components. A true engine builder, when you're buying an engine from me, you're talking to me. I don't have a $12 an hour kid in the back building my motors. I build my motors. You call me or you email me, and we're going to go over exactly what your needs are, exactly what kind of car you have, how you're going to drive it, and I'm going to tailor that engine from the cubic inches to the internals, to the camshaft profile, to the head size and design, to intake manifold, and what type of porting I'm going to do, and all that type of stuff, so you get the ultimate motor and your car performs. That's what got me my reputation. Buying a crate motor that's generically made, or worse yet, Hecho in Mexico. We didn't move down to Mexico because of quality. We went down there because it's cheap. They're not putting out great motors that are made down there. And a lot of the crate motors or components are either from there or in China. No thanks.